Hey everyone, it's Ardyth, and I'm excited to be a guest on Justine's channel today. I've got 5 quick Christmas cards that use easy stencil techniques. And speaking of techniques, make sure to check out Justine's Technique Resource Binder course. It's a 12-month course that includes 24 videos. You'll end up with an entire binder filled with tons of techniques, and each one will have its own printable card, so when you do the technique and store it in the binder, you'll have all the instructions on the back. It's flexible too. You can do it at your own pace, choose the techniques you want to include, and organize your techniques in your binder as you wish. There's more information on Justine's blog, and the link for that is included in the description below. Okay, let's dive right in. My first card uses this new wonderful Wreath Stencil from Altenew and an easy flip technique. I started by placing the stencil onto my cardstock and securing it with purple tape. I also put purple tape over the berries in the center to prevent any tragic ink blending accidents, and I put down my first layer with Catherine Pooler's Sage ink. You can make the blending as even as you want. I like the variation in tone by not worrying too much about that. Then I flip my stencil over, and when you're flipping your stencil, you need to clean and dry it first. Yes, I learned that the hard way, but it seems really obvious to me now. You can see that the leaves are now all kind of pointing in the opposite direction. The important thing is to make sure that the circle of branches is in the same place as the previous layer, otherwise the whole thing will just look a bit off. This time I used Spruce ink, which is a dark foresty green. I stamped a sentiment in VersaFine Onyx ink, and to finish it off, I blended some Rouge ink through the berry holes in random spaces around the wreath. These pops of red really add the festive feeling, and that just shows how versatile this wreath can be all through the year. This technique is a fun alternative to shifting the stencil, but both techniques give you a result that has more depth and interest in the leaves, especially when you use different shades of ink like I did here. My next card uses a Honeybee Stamps Poinsettia stencil. This is stylized and artistic, and it gives a really fun look. I chose a partial outline technique to isolate one of the flowers for my card. I used a 0.5 sized Copic multiliner and simply outlined the portions of the stencil I wanted on my card. These pens come in a variety of sizes that give you lines of different thicknesses. I think that this size pen gives a nice, crisp, defined line, but isn't overwhelming. But depending on the look you want, you can choose another one. The trickiest part of this technique is deciding where to stop. I wanted to have a full flower and lots of leaves so there would be both red and green, and of course gold for the centers. This time I used pixie spray on the back of the stencil to hold it in place. Some of these shapes have very thin lines between them, and I wanted as little movement as possible. Then I simply colored in everything with my Copics. I chose 3 shades of red, green, and gold, so that I could create lots of contrast. They're all listed below in the supply list. To make the flower pop, I also put some gray shadows on the bottom left sides of the shapes with 2 toner gray Copic markers, and I blended some It's a Boy ink around the panel, fading it out as I got closer to the poinsettia, so I didn't have to worry about contaminating any of the colors. To finish this one off, I added a simple Merry Christmas from a new set from a Jillian Vance design, stamped in VersaFine Onyx ink, and I added a few areas of stickles for some festive sparkle. My next card uses a simple masking technique to create a frame around the edge of my card. I chose this leaf stencil from Pretty Pink Posh because the shape of the leaves made me think of mistletoe. I used pixie spray on the back of this stencil, but then I also used some purple tape to mask over the leaves that I didn't want to have any ink blending through. The irregular shapes meant that I needed to tear the tape to fit along each one, but it only took a minute. This time I used lime Rickey ink on my first pass with a blender brush to get all over coverage. Then I went back in with a sponge dauber and the spruce ink to add a little bit of low light to each leaf before blending with lime Rickey again to get a smooth blend between the 2 shades of green. Then I flipped the card panel and I did the other side with the same method. The sponge dauber gives me more control over the placement of the ink in these little spaces. When it came time for the ends of the panel, I lined up 2 branches that would fit in the space, and I used more purple tape to mask off the other leaves. Cleaning and drying the stencil would have been a good idea here. The purple tape didn't want to stick to that stencil surface once it was slick with the ink, and I ended up with a couple of extra areas blended, but they aren't really noticeable. I flipped the card panel again and did the other end, and the result is a beautiful frame of mistletoe. I added another new sentiment from a Jillian Vance design, and I used some Nouveau Dream Drops in Cloud 9 color to create some pearlescent berries in the leaves. My next card uses an old stencil that I've had for years. I have no idea who made it, but it came with both the stencil and the mask for the angel, so I thought it would be fun to create a card that used both. I put pixie spray on the back of this one, and it will act as a mask as I blend various blue and gray inks over it to create my night sky. I started with Fiesta blue right around the angel, and then I continued through the darker colors, Something Borrowed, Suede shoes, and then I added some Queen for a Day, which is a deep, rich purple. I put a pad of recycled newsprint behind my panel. I like to work on this surface because it's absorbent, which means that it takes that first heavy amount of ink off the brush, and it also means that the ink is not sitting there waiting to be picked up by my card or my fingers and create smudges. After the purple, I did something I'm not sure I loved. I added some blackjack, which is a dark gray. I was trying to darken the sky, but I feel like I lost some of the richness of the blues, so I probably wouldn't do it next time. Before I removed the mask, I spritzed the sky with water to create some texture, and I removed the water and color with a dry paper towel. I trimmed the panel with a scalloped rectangle from Catherine Pooler Designs and stamped a peace sentiment from a Jillian Vance design. And then I thought about how to add some sparkle. This time I placed the stencil portion down on the panel, and I ran a very thin bead of stardust stickles around the outside. Or is that the inside? I didn't put it over the sentiment. Really, I should have thought of this before I stamped that. I used my fingers to kind of smoosh the stickles out from the edges and give the angel kind of a sparkly trim. For her trumpet and halo, I used some platinum stickles. I guess it's a bit like using glitter paste, but on a very small scale. To finish this one, I just put it onto a white card base. For my final card, I did a stencil layering technique. I chose this stencil, and again, I don't know who makes this particular one, but I was able to find a similar one to link to in the supply list below. And the first thing I did was draw through the stencil onto a full back sticky note, and then cut out 4 masks. I cut up through the note into the circle, and because it's fully sticky on the back, it'll still stay in place. Then I selectively placed the masks over the stencil and blended some ink into it with a sponge dauber. I wanted to have it be heavier around the edges and lighter in the center to create some rounded dimension, and the small sponge daubers give that kind of control. Then I grabbed this new Catherine Pooler Spotlight stencil and I blended over the same area with the same color ink. This gave me kind of a starburst pattern, which reminds me of those old glass ornaments. The highlight and dimension are still visible, but this ornament now has lots of interest in texture as well. I chose a festive partial rainbow of colors, and I inked selected areas over the panel, leaving a blank area for a Catherine Pooler design sentiment. To finish this card, I used a ruler and that Copic multiliner pen to draw in the strings, so the ornaments look like they're hanging. I added a color coordinating jewel from Pretty Pink Posh to the center of each ornament, and I backed the panel onto a black card base. I hope you enjoyed watching these cards come together and that you're inspired to try some of these easy techniques yourself. I want to thank Justine for having me as a guest here today and to remind you to check out her technique class. Product links are below, and I'd love it if you popped over to my channel and watched some more videos, and even subscribe if you like what you find. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.